Welcome, everyone. Really grateful that y'all have joined us today for our sounding seminar on beauty and desire and human flourishing. These sounding seminars are opportunities for us just to take some time and consider things that are important to our culture, things that are important to the church, and things that are important to our own spiritual journey. And when we're talking about beauty and desire and human flourishing, that's important all the way around. So glad that you've joined us. My name is Bill Haley. I'm the Executive Director of Coracle. Coracle, it's very simple, very simple. We help people go deeper into God so that we can go deeper into the brokenness of the world with God's redemptive power. And we do that through spiritual formation for kingdom action. I'll share a little bit more about Curt Thompson here in a moment, but we're really grateful to have him with us today to discuss beauty, desire, and human flourishing. This is part of our Beauty for Ballast initiative that we've been rolling out this year. This initiative for Coracle of Beauty for Ballast was born out of the sense that with so much pressure and challenge surrounding us in the last year, and frankly, throughout all of life, that we need to stay close to beauty. Because staying close to beauty is one way of staying nearer to God. And so there's more background on that assertion that beauty really matters that can be found in the article that I wrote and put out earlier this year. Special thank you today to our partners for this, Rock Recovery and Designed to Connect and Theological Horizons. There's going to be some more information about these dear friends and partners and beautiful, powerful ministries in the chat here. Would encourage you to use the chat today as we go along for your comments, things that have been said that were particularly meaningful for you or wherever it took your mind. And if you have questions specifically that you hope that Curt can pick up later, I would encourage you to chat those questions to Carla Petty. Just do a direct message to her. We'll be compiling those and we'll be drawing from those by the end of our time for discussion. I'm going to pray before I introduce Curt. And I would like to begin with an ancient prayer from the Jewish prayer book, also known as the Psalms. This is from Psalm 27, verse 4. One thing have I asked of the Lord, and that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. Lord, we thank you that you are beautiful. We thank you for this opportunity today to explore some really important ideas and themes and invitations. We thank you for Curt, for his life, for his work, for his ministry. And we just ask that you would send your Holy Spirit into this conversation today, that we might be led and even beckoned by you, by the desires you put in us and by the beauty that you've surrounded us with, and with the community that you've given us in the company of others. So we thank you and ask your blessing on this time and your help in Jesus' name. Amen. So a lot of you know Curt Thompson. That's why you're here today. Curt is a psychiatrist in Falls Church, Virginia. He's the founder of Being Known, and Being Known is just I love it because it integrates various strange things. And as one who loves integrating various strange things, I love what Being Known does, because it's seeking to develop resources to help people understand interpersonal neurobiology, Christian spiritual formation, vocational creativity, and the Christian view of what it means to be human. And all of this deeply grounded in real people's actual lives, for the sake of real people's actual flourishing. So Curt's the author of several books, and most recently, or I should say forthcoming, his newest book is called The Soul of Desire, Discovering the Neuroscience of Longing and Beauty and Community. And even now, I would just say, hey, y'all, let's pre-order this thing because it's coming out in late September. But you can pre-order it now so that it will be delivered to your mailbox as soon as it's available. And there's a link there in the chat to be able to pre-order it. So do that now. I'm okay with that, or wait until 1:30 and you can do it then, but let's all do that. It's very likely that we'll have a Coracle book discussion on this book sometime later in the year after we've all had a chance to read it. But over Curt and I have been friends and brothers for many years now. And over the years, we've really enjoyed offering things together. We're kind of sensitive to the next opportunity to do something together because it's just fun. And so earlier this year, he and I were talking about something else completely. And I mentioned that I'd been thinking a lot about the importance of beauty, especially in tough times, and that we were going to try to deeply engage that. And Curt said that he'd soon be releasing a book about beauty. And so we said we should have a conversation about that. And so here we are today doing just that. Welcome to you, brother. It's really great to be doing this together, and I'm really excited to learn and explore with you. I've got my list of questions. Who knows if that's where we'll end up going. But welcome to you, man. I don't know if you want to say anything before I throw up an image.
Well, I think, anytime, gosh, if we need to have one of these webinars in order for you and me to have a chance to have a conversation, like just anybody else can watch us talk. I don't care. It's great. Just another opportunity for us to have a conversation. I want to say, we were talking before we started this about Coracle, and nobody's paying me to say this, but Bill, I want to say it's a delight to be here. And as we were saying, I'm so grateful for the presence of what Coracle is doing in the world by being a presence itself of beauty and goodness. And as I mentioned, this slow work of God that I think that you in so many ways represent, that becomes a beacon for people to be drawn to and then invited into. I love that notion of doing this, inviting people deeply into God, and so that we can then enter into God's work in the world in places that are painful, which I think that we'll talk about today. And so I'm grateful to be here and to be with you, and grateful for the work that Coracle has been doing for all these years.
Well, good to keep on doing it together.
Yeah.
Want to kick us off with an image. A couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the seminar, I tossed out this image. I got excited. You got excited because this is actually one of our favorite places in the world. And if we could see an image here of Coventry Cathedral. So this is in Coventry, England. Doesn't look like much until we understand what's going on here. So let me give some background, and then Curt, will ask you to sort of interpret what are we seeing. So in the bottom of the picture there, you see the footprint of an old cathedral. So this cathedral was in Coventry was finished and completed in, I want to say, the 14th and 15th centuries. And so had you been around then, you would have seen an actual building. But in 1940, during the Coventry Blitz, when the Luftwaffe from Nazi Germany was bombing the heck out of Coventry, the cathedral sustained a direct hit and blew the thing apart, except for what you see standing. There were questions. Do we tear down the rest and just rebuild something else? Eventually, it was decided, no, we're going to pause and we're going to see if there's a better purpose for this scene of devastation. Right after the bomb dropped and exploded, the priest who was in charge of the cathedral went up to the front of there to the right, to the front of the church near the altar, and he inscribed behind it, "Father, forgive." That was his first reaction. And when they were clearing the wreckage out, somebody noticed that there were some of the cross beams that had fallen, and they had fallen in the form of a cross. And it was decided that as opposed to tearing the thing down, they would build a new cathedral, but they would renovate what was remaining so it could tell a story. And so if you go there today, in the front of the church, on the altar, you'll see those charred cross beams erected into an actual cross. And on the altar now is emblazoned in gold print, "Father, forgive." And so on the top of this picture, what we're seeing is the new cathedral that was begun to be built in the 1950s. And this new cathedral, which was a global project to complete, is a cathedral that is devoted to reconciliation. So if you go there now, you can go to the new cathedral, or you can sit in the footprint of the old cathedral, which is now a beautiful place. So Curt, how does this speak? What do you see?
Gosh, it's hard not to weep. One of the things, Bill, that really, when I was looking, I've not been to Coventry. I'm familiar with the story, but I've not been. And I think one of the first things that strikes me as I look at this particular picture, as I was looking at it, in preparation for a time, is that awning that juts out from the new cathedral that comes over and covers this space. It's almost a way of even physically, spatially in my mind, it connects these two things. And I think, one of the first things that really strikes me is that it's virtually impossible to see either one of these without being aware of the presence of the other. It's one of the first things that strikes me. And it tells me the story that I live a life in which I would love to get rid of my old wounds and pretend as if they never happened. No one would have predicted, I think, John's story in which Jesus comes from the grave retaining his scars. The Roman gods would never have had this. That we are people who, even with all that we long for in our newness, I'd like to just get rid of what's been broken and old. But it is on this side of the Perusia, on this side of the full emergence of the new heaven and new earth, I'm reminded that this new thing that I see actually can only be imagined in light of the old thing. And the old thing is close to it. It's, I would like to think that I could get over my stuff. I could put that behind me and I never get angry again. I never get envious again. I never get any of those old things before, but I recognize that the old broken wounds are never very far away. But the work is that our attention is being drawn to what's been done in the face of it. In the face of catastrophe, God is in the business of coming to that very place, beginning with forgiveness, beginning with the very charred ruins of who we are, and saying it's in this very space that a new beauty that you can't yet imagine is going to emerge, and I'm going to make it happen. And not only that, but I'm going to ask you to join me in making it happen. And I think that, again, you look at the new and it allows you to see that the old was in fact something that was getting me ready for the new. How many patients do I have who say, I just wish that, what happened in my life would never have happened. To which I want to say, I really get it. I'm sure there were those who would say on Holy Saturday, gosh, I don't want Good Friday to have happened, because at that point it wasn't good yet. But I'm just imagining kind of where we are in the world and all of the things that are so broken that are represented by the bombed out shell of this old cathedral. I see that what God is about is saying, I'm not afraid of this. I'm not worried about this. And in fact, it is in our racism, it is in our political rancor, it is in our environmental decay, it is in all these things. That's where I'm going to come and plant myself. And I'm going to ask you to come to where I am and build the new church. And imagine with me where beauty is going to emerge in the very last place you could have ever seen it coming.
Yeah. This, I'm sure the old Coventry Cathedral was pretty, but it's not nearly as powerful as this picture, right? Yeah. And, when I see it, I think we can go ahead and take down that photo. When I see it, it now is really beautiful, but it also inspires in me desire, because I'm sitting there in that footprint and I'm looking at something that is more beautiful because of the brokenness that happened and because of the redemption that has entered in. And it's that's what I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of, by God's grace, entering into broken things and seeing beautiful things come out. And it inspires desire in me. So let's talk about desire. We're talking about the relationship between desire and beauty. We have a complicated relationship with desire, I think, at least for those of us who have grown up in certain sorts of churches. We're taught to mistrust it. We're taught that it's dangerous. We're taught to be careful with it. We're taught to be suspicious. And yet, there it is. Like, desire's there. It's powerful. It's important. Oddly seems to matter to Jesus. What is the point, brother? Why are we people who desire things so strongly?
Well, Bill, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but I have to say, those first 11 chapters of Genesis are just like constantly doing things to me. And when I look at the first chapter, we look at all these things where, and God said, "Let there be light." And God said, "Let's separate the water from above from water below." Like, and let there, and so it was. And then you get to verse 26, and there is this conversation that appears to happen, right? Let us, like he's going to think about it. Like, no, let's really do this. This said, let us do this. There's this sense that even when God like looks upon it and sees that it's good, I talk about this in the book, that it's not just that God is observing something that is beautiful that he's made. It is in the act of looking upon it that beauty is what emerges. Beauty is emerging as a response to being looked upon by God. This sense that God's desire is to pull desire forth out of even the very creation. And so if we are going to take seriously our being made in God's image, part of being image bearers is that we also are people of desire in the way that God is also a God of great longing and desire. His desire to be connected to us, this holy Trinitarian desire for beauty and goodness and joy and creativity. And so that's who we are. We are people of desire. And it is tricky because we would say that what evil wants to do with that is to hijack it. And one might say that that's what happens in Genesis 3, that one takes this longing, applies shame to it in this conversation with the woman. There is a wound. And just because I'm wounded doesn't mean that my desire suddenly goes away. It just means that it's now going to be hijacked. It's going to be directed in a different movement. We can't escape desire. We can't escape it. The question is, in which way, how will I direct it? And part of the challenge, of course, is that there's so many things that we desire developmentally as we're growing up that we don't even know that we don't know that we have. So I grew up in a house where I have two God-fearing parents who at the same time are imperfect. And, one of the ways that these kinds of things happen would be that, my mom was such that I would end up kind of managing her anxiety. And my dad was such that I would end up managing the potential for him being angry, despite the fact that he wasn't an angry guy. But my temperament was such that I'm having to do a lot of work of managing stuff in my house, which starts early, continues throughout my, developmental years. And I'm not even aware that I'm doing this. But one of the things that means is that there are plenty of places along the way where I desire things that they never get acknowledged. Mm-hmm. Or I learn that desire is dangerous, right? To name things, if I want this, but don't piss God off, right? Don't make him mad. All those kinds of things in which shame and fear literally neurobiologically become spliced together with desire, such that it just becomes easier not to want, rather than to run the gauntlet of wanting and paying a price for it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we see then that desire isn't an option. And we would say that our greatest desire is this sense of being seen, being known. So when Jesus in John 1:38 says to the Baptist disciples, "What do you want?" This is not just like filler conversation, to get to well, here's where I'm coming to, here's, come see where I'm living. It's a serious question. What do you want? And the disciples' response, now perhaps it was a proper way to respond to a rabbi, but where are you living? That doesn't tell me what you want. Tell me what you really want. And that question begins to get to this sense of when we begin to answer it, we see that we are people who are longing to be deeply known in the places of our deepest desires for beauty and goodness, and to demonstrate who we most beautifully are. But also, I long to be known in the places that I hate the most about myself. But that also is tricky, because the moment that I invite you into that place that I most deeply desire, I run the risk of you seeing me and then leaving. And so this is why it requires our willingness, when we are pursuing others who long to be seen by us, but who are also afraid of it, our willingness to remain when they're afraid that we are going to leave the room. And so desire to be known, which we can't escape neurobiologically, we can't escape it relationally, we can't escape it. But I would go further and say that this notion of beauty that is chock full in Genesis chapter 1, and he saw that it was beautiful, not just good. The Hebrew for good is also the Hebrew for beautiful. This notion that we long to be known in order for us to go on together and create beauty and goodness in the world. And that, I would say, is something that is completely anathema to evil. Evil knows that the moment that Easter happens, it's not just a matter of people being delivered from feeling bad, being delivered from guilt. Evil knows that beauty is coming for it. And there will be no stopping it. And so what does it do? It will want to undermine each of us. Because I don't just want to create beauty. Beauty is what God has put in my heart for me to become. Because that's also being like him. Evil doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And so on the individual level, as well as the social level, evil is all about devouring it rather than desiring beauty, which is then what I'm tempted to do, right? And for me, there's a very, very thin line between my desire for beauty, my desire to become beauty, and my willingness to devour it, which I'm pretty good at, frankly.
Sort of what we are all tempted to do, which is take a good gift of God, right, which is given for all of our sake, but to take it and to use it for my own twistedness, right?
Right. As a way for me to, I mean, I think about, God bless her. I mean, like, Eve was not in an easy place. I mean, she's got a husband who's like, not opening his yap, right? He's not coming to her aid. And she's been wounded in this conversation, and there is the fruit. And the fruit can help me cope, right? The taking, the devouring, the consumption is a way, this is what addiction is. This is what idolatry is. It is a way for me to cope with my fear and my shame and my guilt, my disintegrating states, both within me and between me and you.
Yeah. Well, one thing you said about where our desire comes from that I have not thought about, and so I appreciate you raising it, and it's powerful, is that one of the reasons why we desire is because we are made in the image of a God who desires. That is powerful.
Yeah.
And somehow that makes God more vibrant. That God isn't just like holy and good and sort of out there, but actually, no, God is actually pulsating with desire, and that's where creation comes from. I'm made in that image. I'm that way too. So it seems to me that if we want to, that we need to, it would be good for us to pay attention to our own desires honestly, that they actually matter. They help us interpret things. They help us know.
Right. We often, when we read Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the verse that says that, for he has put eternity in their hearts. We often quote that, but forget that the words that precede it that read that he makes everything beautiful in its time. And this notion that eternity in their hearts is not just about the measurement of time. It is about the measurement of depth of longing. The depth of our longing for, I would say, beauty, of what we long to become, and that eternity is the breath of the Holy Trinity. It is, as you say, the very nature. It is this pulsating God who is in the business of saying, come on, as opposed to, you're right, like this inert figure that is off in the distance that somehow I have to find a way to emulate if I can figure out how to do that and not screw it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's shift to beauty then. So we've talked a little bit about how desire matters, and I, by the way, I just want to come back. So powerful. You've raised it, but you didn't. You've raised it, but you didn't highlight it, and that is that Jesus's first question, the first thing out of his mouth in a question, is, "What do you want?" That it seems like the placement of his question matters. However, John chose to tell it.
Yeah.
But doesn't that create the possibility of a beautiful spiritual exercise, which is to get by oneself in a room, to imagine Jesus across from us, and to imagine him saying to me, "Bill, what do you want?" And for me to be willing in his presence to really express what I want. There's just an invitation there to something powerful, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can imagine him asking me that question and me saying things like, I don't know what I want. And him saying, well, I've got eternity. I think we can just wait until you eventually like name what that is. Or what are you afraid? Like, I can imagine the conversation going for a while as he has to work through all of my hedging. And all of my all of my fear of even answering the question, and all of the way that shame in my life, for instance, has helped me so bury desire that it's going to take a while for me to pull those defensive layers off enough to get to that. And then I can hear him saying, you know, when I say things like the things that I desire that might be untoward, he might say, well, tell me, what's the desire behind that? What is it that you want with the idealized woman? What is it that you want with power? What is it that you want with fame? What is it like? What is it behind that you really want? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
And eventually we get to, I think that what we get to is, I want you.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't want you like I want my cup of coffee. I want to be wanted by that which is the most beautiful person in the world.
Yeah. So why does beauty matter? How does beauty relate to this?
Well, you know, there are a lot of people who have written prolifically and deeply about this. In the course of this work for this book, I've been introduced to Urs von Balthazar, the Catholic theologian, who has just kind of, I mean, like I have no words because he said them all. And his work on beauty has been transformative for me. Along with other philosophers and artists as well, right? The artists have this kind of like leading edge of inviting us to imagine beauty in a way. And, you know, we live in this tradition in the West when we think about beauty in such a way philosophically, and this is where von Balthazar has been so helpful for me. We live in a way such that we're big thinkers. We think a lot, and we're very wordy people in the West. We like to know that we know what the truth is, the logical linear truth. And once we know the truth, then we can define that which can be good. And of course, we can then use that definition to apply and figure out what is actually beautiful. And that's an overly simplified version of how philosophy, but also culture tends to approach beauty. We also approach it in such a way that it's a bit of a luxury, right? Once we get everything else in the world taken care of, then if we have time and the money, then we'll collect beauty and we'll put it in a museum. And Balthazar says, no, it's the other way around. That before anything else happens in the world, our senses are encountering the material world, and it is the beauty of the world that is an extension of the very essence of God. It is the beauty of the world that captures who we are, that enables us to see what is good, and therefore enables us to figure out what is true. Which is so interesting to me because neurobiologically, you know, we like to say that the body operates, the brain, the mind operates bottom to top and right to left, meaning spinal cord, brainstem, right hemisphere, left hemisphere. First we sense, and then we make sense of what we sense. And this is what the mind is doing 24/7. And once we've made sense of something, then we have a sense of that, and then we make sense of that as well. This way of doing things, which is completely in line with what von Balthazar is writing. And so we would say it is our encounter with beauty that invites us into the telling of the gospel story. And so I like to invite people to think of beauty in these three words, all of which begin with the letter W, that first, beauty is a matter of wonder.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to ask, like, what's beautiful? It's like anything that captures you with wonder. And we often have to think about grand things, a beautiful sunset, the ocean, the forest, the mountain, and so forth. But what about those? I mean, here's the thing, right? The day after Coventry was bombed, nobody's going to look at that cathedral and say, yeah, there's beauty everywhere here. But you see what you see now,
mm-hmm.
and you wonder. Mm-hmm. You're drawn to the shell of it because of what God is doing. And so we are drawn to wonder. We are drawn then to welcome. This is the other thing that beauty does. Beauty doesn't stand and say, for a price, I'll let you see me. No, beauty welcomes us, which is why it's so easy for us to exploit it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not in charge. It doesn't make demands on us to be in its presence. And then the last thing is that beauty draws us to worship.
Mm-hmm.
And this, of course, is where it gets tricky for me, because I don't just want to worship what it's directing me to. Beauty is pointing me to the Trinity. Beauty is pointing me to my Creator. It becomes this window pane through which I'm looking at the one who's looking at us and saying, I can't believe that I get to be your God.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I often look at beauty, stop there, I worship it because it now becomes the thing that I want to control, to hold on to clutch as a way to cope with my own unfinished business. But when we allow ourselves to allow it to draw us to God, we are invariably led to worship. And this then becomes what we would say when Jesus says in John's gospel to his disciples, people will know that you are my disciples by the way you love one another. Mm. And you love one another by creating beauty out of the hardest places, even in your relationships. And people will look at that and they will be drawn to it because it is a wonder. Mm. There will be no way the world can explain that. And that community will also welcome them. Come and join us. And when they do, they find that we're a community that worships. Mm. And that worship is a direct function of beauty. And in our worship, we are made even more beautiful ourselves. Mm.
Seems to me then that, given some of what you're saying, that it's good to develop the capacity to see beauty, right, in its myriad form, whether it be large or small, but to cultivate the ability to look for and see beauty wherever we are, whatever we are surrounded by, and then potentially even to see the potential for beauty, right?
Exactly. So one of the things, I mean, this is a great point. One of the things that we're doing in our practice now is we have over the last 3 years made this kind of slow turning shift kind of philosophically, in the sense that we are longing for people, as we begin to work with them early on, we want to introduce the question of what is the new artifact of beauty that you believe God is longing to create with you and in you and through you? As opposed to, or in addition to, the question, what is your problem that we can fix?
Right.
We're asking, what is the artifact, what is the artistic expression that God is longing to create? Of course, these things, answering those questions involve very different ways in which we activate the mind and the brain, so forth. But I think that one of the important elements of this then becomes that we give people the assignment in what way, we ask this question, in what way today have you put yourself in the path of oncoming beauty? I want you to be practicing every day, looking for an opportunity to look for it. I want you to keep a journal of it. Today, I walked outside my house, and before I got in my car, I walked over to the small maple tree, and I took a leaf in my hand and held it. Now, of course, you know, we tell people, like, don't do this in your neighbor's yard at like 7 in the morning. It would look a little weird. But what we're really doing is we're inviting people to practice with intention, as a spiritual discipline, with intention, putting yourself in the path of beauty and allowing it to have an effect on what you sense, what you image, and therefore what you think. Allow it to draw you into a space of wonder, welcome, and worship. And then allow that to shift what you begin to pay attention to. And what we find is this: if you like many things, if I were to say to you, how many yellow cars have you seen in the last week? You may or may not be able to tell me, but if I give you the assignment, I want you to count the number of yellow cars that you see in the next week. You will see yellow cars for the next week, but for the next month, you'll be noticing yellow cars when before you weren't noticing them at all.
Yeah.
When we practice putting ourselves in the path of oncoming beauty, you're absolutely right. We then become primed. We literally prime our prefrontal cortex to be on the lookout for, even non-consciously, to be on the lookout for moments of beauty that are emerging where heretofore we wouldn't have considered that that's even a possibility.
It's interesting. That reminds me of when I was a teenager and my dad and I would drive, we would be on the lookout for hawks, like, you know, hawks sitting on a tree or sitting on a power line or whatever. And then, you know, over the years after, you know, certainly after I moved away from home and certainly after my dad's died, and I will see a hawk on the side of the road, I'll think of my dad. What's amazing is that that experience in my teenage years makes me really good at spotting hawks on the highway. Like, I'm really good at it. Because somehow my mind got changed so that I'm trained to see it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Exactly. And this is what we say. I mean, this is why, for instance, it is so important for like something as simple, if you will, as when we read the Gospels, when we read any scriptures, but the Gospels in particular, but it takes a little more effort with the letters. When you read the story of Zacchaeus, when you read the story of the woman with the bleeding dyscrasia, when you read these things, it's helpful for us. We have to picture being in that space. And if we practice being in that space, we activate parts of our neural circuitry that enable the story itself to have impact on more of me than the story can have on me if all I'm doing is reading off of a page. Because in many respects, we're doing then exactly what you were doing as a teenager, looking at for hawks. You weren't just reading about them. You weren't just hearing stories. Like, you were actively training your brain to look for something that now, even without having to, implicitly, you are primed, you're driving, and you see a certain form, and you know that's a crow, that's not a hawk.
Yeah.
Or you know that's a falcon, that's not a turkey buzzard. Because it's not just a fact, it is in your chest. You feel the presence of the bird.
So are you saying, Curt, that we can learn to see beauty in such a way that it becomes even an unconscious ability?
Indeed. I mean, this is the way great artists, this is the way great musicians learn to play, right? They practice, like with intentionality. Great writers write. They say the best poets are the ones who write the most poetry because they're practicing. And as they practice, they prime and recruit neural circuitry to become activated that heretofore wasn't, because I wasn't practicing. But if I'm practicing looking for hawks as a teenager, I become the hawk master as an adult. It's like breathing for you.
Yeah. You can call me hawk master anytime you want. I know we want to get
Hawkeye Haley. That's where we're going to go from here on out.
We want to get to a couple of questions that are being asked, but before we do, I want to I would love for you just to briefly unpack one of your own sentences, and then I'm going to ask you a really unfair question. So here's the sentence. Beauty is a herald of the work of Good Friday into Easter. What does that mean?
I think for me, Bill, it's I need Easter in the worst way. Far more than I even know that I need it. But when I get it, it shows me just even how much more I needed Good Friday. And before, Good Friday would just be my normal life. It's the parts of me that are broken and there's no way out of it. But what beauty does is that beauty says that which is broken will not remain so. One of the things that I talk about in the book is this notion that there's nothing through the lens of Easter. There's nothing more beautiful than a crucified Lord. The shell of Coventry Cathedral is now unspeakably beautiful because of what sits beside it. Because we know of what comes. And beauty of any kind heralds not just something that is beautiful. It invites us to fearlessly look at Good Friday. It invites us to be John and Mary, who are speaking to, like, can you imagine talking, like having a conversation with Jesus, like while he's on the cross? No. Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother. Looking upon him, but through the lens of Easter, everything, all beauty is telling us that all brokenness has the potential to be pulled from Good Friday through Holy Saturday into Easter and into new heaven and earth. And that is what we, as Jesus, now fellow travelers, are called to be heralding to others. When we are with those whose brokenness themselves, like they're like, all I see is Good Friday, and it's not even good.
Right.
I want to be the person for them because I have these people in my life who can look at them and say, I see Easter.
Yeah.
I see beauty where you don't yet imagine it. And I want us together to practice, beginning to practice seeing it.
Yeah.
Because I do say this too, Bill, like when heaven comes, it's going to be overwhelming. And like, if we're not practiced getting ready for it, you know, I think about Lewis and the Great Divorce and those guys trying to pick up pears off the ground and they couldn't even lift them because they're too real. The pears are too real and the humans aren't. And I think that's what beauty does to us. It makes us more real.
Yeah. You know, thinking about that image of Coventry Cathedral, how powerful to think, and I think it's true, how powerful to imagine that each one of our, on the other side of glory, each one of our lives is going to look like that thing, where there will be something broken that has been redeemed and something better that's been made possible because of it. And the whole world. That the story of God's creation is going to be all the more powerful and beautiful precisely because of redemption.
Right.
That was required.
Right on.
All right, here's the unfair question. This is a hey friends.
Oh, good. I feel like I'm probably like one of my patients now getting asked something from me. Okay, good.
Friends, this is a shameless plug to pre-order Curt's book. So if we could put the pre-order link back in there again, I just hope that we'll all do it. The title, The Soul of Desire, Discovering the Neuroscience of Longing, Beauty, and Community. Why, Curt, did you write this book?
Well, at least you're honest when you say you're going to ask an unfair question. it just so happened that when I wrote The Soul of Shame, you get done, and then you spend after you write it, you spend the next 2 years trying to work out the stuff you wrote about, like in your own life. And you wonder, gosh, why, if I just left well enough alone, I wouldn't have to be dealing with all this stuff in my own life that, kind of comes to light. I'll say this, this book was not an easy project. It was a hard project through nobody's fault. But there were a number of different reasons why it turned out to be a project that took as long as it took. It was a project that I wrote through some seasons that were probably a couple, at least one season that was really one of the more difficult in recent memory for me, just for a lot of other things going on in my life. And I think I would say in many respects, it was an expression of desperation. Like there is a sense in which I really need what I wrote about to be true. And I believe it is, most of the time, most days. And I'm aware that I'm, as I tell folks, right, I'm a professional sinner. I'm really good at sinning. And so I suppose in some respects, I've written it so that I can now do the work.
Well, I'm excited to read it. I'm excited because all three of those things matter deeply to me. Desire and beauty and community. And I'm really excited to learn how in the world my body and brain is actually physiologically connected to those sort of fuzzy ideas. So
I'll say this one last thing. There are a number of different, I would say kind of like rails on which this is running. One rail is this notion of desire that we've talked about. One rail is beauty. And in particular, I reference a lot of artwork of a range of different kinds of, expressive art. And as some of you may know, Mako Fujimura has been gracious enough to write the foreword to the book. And in many respects, the connection that he and I share is part of what helped me get this thing off the ground as well. Another, though, really important piece of this is the work that we're doing in our practice in what we're calling these confessional communities, otherwise known as group therapy, but we talk about them as confessional communities for specific reasons that I outline in the book. And I would say that when it comes to our human relationality, we explore the prayer that you read, Psalm 27:4 is the verse that we unpack in the second half, over the course of the second half of the book. And this notion that it is in the context of vulnerable community that relationships are able to do the very work that we've been talking about. And that work that I've been, it's been my privilege to be part of over the last several years in our practice, has been transformational for me as I've watched people do the work of community that has been so necessary. And how many times have I heard one of our participants in the group say something like, after some repair has been made of some rupture between the people in the group, right? When some god-awful story has been told in which the group becomes the healing presence, for someone to say, I've never seen anything more beautiful in my life in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah. There's almost nothing more powerful or beautiful than watching redemption. Yeah. So a couple of questions from the folks, and it's interesting. There's a couple that are similar. Margaret Whistler talks about it. Another person has talked about it. I'll just read them both, and then you can sort of work with it. One is, what are ways to combat shame in our lives to create space for beauty? The other is, how do we untangle shame and fear from desire? So these are questions about the relationship between shame and its impact on our desire and our capacity for beauty.
So I think in responding to the question about what do we do about shame, there are, I would, and how does beauty have anything to say to that? I would say that's another element of that. I would say that we approach it from two different directions. One direction is that shame remains most powerfully embedded within us, primarily through isolation. As long as I have any felt sense, image, feeling, thought, embodied state of shame that I'm not articulating to somebody else, that remains privatized, it's like an abscess. The more able I am to practice naming what I tame, to name these things that I sense, image, feel, and their attachment to the stories that they are wrapped in, the more light there comes, the less opportunity shame has to take up residence. That's one thing that's important. So it's, what's the community in which I'm dwelling in order for me to tell my story more truly on a regular basis? That's one thing. Another thing is that the way shame operates tends to disintegrate my brain, tends to put me in a position of analysis. When I'm feeling ashamed, I can only think really quite condescendingly, quite contemptuously of myself or of someone else. It's a more analytical posture in the world. I see you as this bad thing, or I see me as this bad thing. I'm over here looking at you over there, analyzing and corrupting it, as opposed to being with. And so my attention, shame wants to use my attention to see the other person in the distance as an object, or see myself as an object of derision, an object of contempt. When I'm with another, or when I'm in the presence of beauty, and I am allowing my attention to be drawn, whether it's Beethoven's Ninth, whether it's a piece from Mark Rothko, whether it's whatever it is that we're talking about, I'm actually allowing my mind to be in the presence of beauty and allowing it to be present with me in the present moment. If I am practicing that, if I'm practicing being in the presence of beauty, I'm disallowing my brain to move in the direction where shame wants to take it. One of the things that community does is that it helps me practice naming things to tame things. And then in remembering, this is one of the other things, assignments that we give to people in our communities all the time. When they have a moment of redemption that we were talking about earlier, that we witness, we give them the assignment of like, look, for the next week, 2 times a day, we want you to take 5 minutes, sit comfortably, quiet your heart, close your eyes, and replay what just happened here in this room. You're going to practice this over and over and over and over again. And then when it gets to this question, the second question of like, how do we untangle things? I want to say that I think about it kind of like what would happen when I was practicing the piano. Like you're playing a piece, and as you come to a certain part of the chord, you find 2 or 3 measures that you can't do very well. And I'd like to think that they would just magically fix themselves, but no, they're not going to do that. What I'm going to have to do is pause on the other parts of the piece that I play well, and I'm going to have to go to those 2 or 3 measures, and I'm going to take it a measure at a time, and I'm going to focus my attention. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to expand my association of those measures that I've now practiced. I'm going to expand and go to the measure or 2 or 3 that come before it. I'm going to start to pay attention to what are the triggers? What are the associated things that lead me down that path that want to tangle desire along with shame? And in the moment that I first start to sense those entanglements starting, I'm going to pause, and I'm literally going to turn my imagination to beauty. I'm going to turn my imagination to, you are my son, you are my daughter, whom I love, and in whom I'm well pleased. Luke 3:22. And not as just some verse that I memorized. I'm going to see Jesus sitting with me in the family room. Or I can say this to you. I'm going to remember the conversation that you and I had back in October. And I'm going to remember your voice. And I'm going to remember what your voice did in the phase of a time that was anything but beautiful.
That's how we have to practice, allowing community, allowing the body of Jesus to be the conduit of the Holy Spirit, whereby which beauty is constructed little by little by little by little. When you look at the 1,600-pound Pietà
Mm-hmm.
in St. Peter's, all right, as Michelangelo would say, all I'm doing is releasing what's inside. I'm not making, I'm just chipping away, chipping. Over how many months does it take for beauty to emerge? And God's not worried about how long it's going to take.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll remember your words from right before we left for vacation, brother. So one of the things I hear you saying is that it seems like there's individual and personal work to be done in terms of disciplining ourselves about how we think and how we see. But then also community is critically important. That is to be in the company of others who know how to both see and also love.
Right. So it's really important for us to recognize that in the same way that we are tasked with going to look for beauty on a regular basis, that we also want to be God's agents in looking for beauty in each other, but looking for it in the very places where, like, I don't think it's going to show up, and like, Lord knows I don't want to tell you about it. But in those places of brokenness, what you do in spiritual direction, when you and I have sat together and you've asked a couple of questions, and the questions invite me to, you welcome my heart into the room. Right? There is a sense in which you're looking for beauty in me where I can't yet see it. And it's in our communities where we're asking each other, what do you want? There's 4 questions in the book that we talk about. Where are you? What do we want? What do you want? Are you able to drink the cup? Because we know that if we're going to do this work, we're going to enter into suffering. Suffering's part of the deal. It's not a thing that it's not an option. And the 4th, do you love me, from Jesus and Peter, this sense of like, if you're loving me, I'm going to come to find those places in you where shame still has a hold on you and beauty has not yet been released, because I have work for you to do in which beauty, the good works that have been prepared for you before the foundation of the world. We need community to see those things in places where we can't yet see them ourselves.
Yeah. I'm going to take one of the questions we've received and turn it into an assertion. And see if you agree that that being in community, or community, enhances our capacity for beauty.
Absolutely. And I would go further and say community is necessary for a durable, long-term capacity to encounter beauty in the way that we are intended to encounter it.
That's great. Well, we are almost out of time, brother. Any last words from you on these topics before I offer a few more things?
In the last chapter of the book, the title of it is "Practicing for Heaven," and I would say that my invitation and my hope is that whoever reads the book, and as you encounter beauty, my hope is for you to is that all of our imaginations would be awakened. Like I won't forget this, Bill, when you're talking like that, God is this pulsating being, right? That our imaginations would be awakened to God's desire for us. And that his desire is not one of consumption. It's not one of devouring. It is one of desire because he sees beauty emerging in us. And as he pulls that beauty out within us, that beauty then extends into the world. And so my encouragement for those who are part of this conversation is that I just want you to know that the world is a far more beautiful place because you are in it.
Amen. I want to echo that to all of us who are gathered today. Thank you all so much for joining for this conversation. And truly, The world is better because each of you are in it, and more beautiful
Mm.
because each of you are in it. I appreciate that truth, Curt. Thank you.
Mm.
If you appreciate this conversation, you guys know how the Zoom emojis work. I'm gonna clap my hands here. Curt, thank you so much, brother. So grateful.
Pleasure. It's been a delight, man.
Yeah, there's lots more to come, I'm sure. Let me pray for us, and we'll head off into the next experience that God has for us. So, Lord, thank you for Curt. Thank you for his faithfulness to his vocation and to the gifts that you've given him of understanding and also articulating. Pray that you would bless him and his family and his ministry. We thank you for the many gifts that you continually shower on us, and just, Lord, increase in each one of us the capacity to be able to see. We love you. You are beautiful. Your desire is us, and we are responding to it by saying, yes, take us, take me, Lord. We just offer you ourselves once again. Thank you for this, as the word that was used was nourishment. Thank you for this time. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.